welcome to this episode of Governance Dialogues. We hope you've enjoyed our discussions over the last 2 months with thought leaders who commented on from various perspectives on different governance challenges and priorities that we're currently facing. My name is Alissa Kole, and I'm the Managing Director of Governance Center, which is a think tank and advisory firm. And it gives me great pleasure to host today Chiara Corazza, who's joining us from Paris today to discuss an issue which is dear to my heart and also to our work at Governance Center, and also I know at the Forum of Women Economy for the Society, and that is the role of women in the economy, and more specifically, the role of women on corporate boards. And of course, for those of you who are frequent guests to governance dialogues and more generally follow the governance debates, the topic of board diversity has been receiving enormous attention over the last 3 to 5 years, I would say, more so every year, for a variety of reasons, from a perspective of board diversity, from a perspective of governance, but also generally from the perspective of fairness, equality, and the potential for women to add to the productive capabilities of the economy. And the numbers speak for themselves. We know that today, if women participated in the economy equally to men, we would add about 250 million jobs and about $28 trillion of GDP to the economy. So the numbers do speak for themselves, but specifically on board diversity, just to give a flavor to this conversation, I think that the progress has been rather uneven. While significant progress has been achieved in Europe, for example, we've seen a little bit less progress in countries like Japan, where still about half corporate boards do not have a single woman on their board. And the situation is also challenging in many countries of the Middle East, some countries in Asia, and other jurisdictions. And even in jurisdictions like Europe, where we've seen important progress, I think it's important to highlight that it's not really been a linear story, in a sense that we've been going from low to high. Countries like Turkey, for example, where an independence requirement was introduced to have 1/3 of the board as independent directors, have actually regressed as a result of that measure as companies move to appoint male directors. So I think it's a very interesting story to kind of delve into the details and look at a global performance and where we're going with that. And I couldn't think of a better invitee than Chiara to join us. So Chiara, thank you so much for joining us from Paris for this conversation.
Good morning to all of you, or good evening, wherever you are. Thank you so much for giving me the floor, because I really am convinced, as a managing director of the Women's Forum, that more than ever, in the light of the COVID and what's happening, we need leadership of women in each field and in each sector at each level worldwide. We have seen how much this crisis needs also a diversity of approach, not only on one hand. And we saw also the risk to go back and to lose many of the advances that we did, because in the crisis, maybe you saw in the media, maybe they saw it in the decision makers, very few women have been associated. And we also saw that in the governance where states where had leaders, women leaders, they did better. They did better because of pragmatic approach, of maybe a more protective approach, but the results is there. Then what we want to highlight, as you said, we have an issue that it's an issue that it's improving, but the risk is in this crisis, we can't go back. No, just to point some fact and figures, we still have only 6% of women CEOs worldwide, and we're still less than 70% of women in the executive committee worldwide. Then you see, it's one of the very key priority of the Women's Forum to be sure that women leaders can be there where they can bring a contribution, not only on women issues, but on climate change, on the place of women in tech, AI, STEM, the place of women, of course, in health, to decide how you will design this recovery. And also where women are, of course, in business, access to finance, access to to capital. I mean, be there where we can bring a contribution. It's not a victim position. We're not there to say, oh, we want, we need. No, it's we can contribute to make a more inclusive world. This is the approach of the Women's Forum. And when we talk about governance, it's one of our key initiatives. Since many years, more than 12 years, we create a very innovative pioneer initiative that works really well, very successful, that we call CEO Champion. It's not a name and shame. It's a gathering of CEOs all around the world. Each time we do an event in each continent, we gather some CEOs who are leading by example in the companies. They're not all perfect, but they have targets, they're committed, they promote women leadership because they're convinced that, as you said, it's good to reduce inequality, it's good for the performance of the company, and it's good, of course, to attract new talents, millennials in the company, and to be social responsible. I mean, it's part of at the end of the enterprise. Yes.
So I know that you've been doing quite a bit of work, and the initiative that you are giving as an example is very interesting, but also that you host different regional meetings in the work of the Women's Forum. And for that particular reason, I wanted to, actually, this is the reason I invited you to the program. And I wanted to perhaps ask you some questions around where you see progress and where you see challenges worldwide. I know, of course, international standard setters like the OECD, where I used to work, have already recommended regulators to adopt quotas or other recommendations and measures. And in the OECD countries, about half of the countries have done so already. And yet, as I mentioned earlier on in this conversation, we see relatively uneven progress. And I wonder if you can comment from a global perspective, where you see women participation on boards improving in recent years and months, and where you see remaining challenges and work to be done by Women's Forum, the 30% Club, and others who are working on this cause.
Yes, what we are working, I mean, I'm convinced, I'm really convinced that we cannot impose the same measure and the same approach in each country. This is really something, you know, there's a French poet who say, Paul Valéry, who say, let's enrich ourselves by our differences. Then I give you an example. I'm not French, I'm Italian and British, but I'm very, I'm marrying what has been done with the loi, le Copé Zimmermann, because in 10 years, France is now world champion with almost 44% of women in boards. It was not easy. Same did Germany. In 10 years, they augmented 10% of the number of women in boards. Spain was spectacular. They went for 3% to almost 38%. I mean, great. Those were quota, and it worked. It worked because it was an appetence of women, of men who wanted to do it. And by the way, if I can add something very personal, I experienced how those boards with women are more professional, not because women are better, but because the companies, to search for women profile, were obliged to see to check inside what were the needs. Do I need a financial profile? Do I need a strategy profile? Do I need a communication profile? And this is something that really worked. Then you have other countries, let's say more the Anglo-Saxon countries, such as United States, Canada, United Kingdom, and where it's more difficult to impose quotas because it's not in the mentality. It's, can I say, more a liberal system? I don't know. And it would be permitted to say it's stupid to impose something that it's not accepted. Then, of course, we can work on targets on that. We can work on numbers, and the results are maybe not so rapid. The success is not the same as we saw in these three countries, but they do what they can. And if we go, as you said, for instance, to other countries, I take an example that's very dear to me. Last year, we did our Americas Forum in Mexico, and we gathered some CEOs from Mexico. The number of women in the CEO in the economy in Mexico, it's really not maybe the most exemplary in the world. Just to give you an idea, you have almost 50% of women who are very well educated and who have a university degree. And then when it comes to be the role in the business, they're less than 10% at a higher position. I even don't want to say how many women are on the boards because it would not be correct. But we had with us Christine Lagarde, who was a guest of honor of this CEO Champion. At the time she was a managing director of IMF. There was Alfonso Romo, who is the economy counselor of the president, and there were some CEOs that were there to learn, to say, what can we do? And it was extremely interesting. And then you had some women CEOs. For instance, Paula Santilli, who was the CEO of Latam in PepsiCo. And she said, don't ask the moon, make some small targets, more strategy, and then keep it and measure it. Yes. And there is another, I mean, it was very interesting to say that women didn't want to ask immediately, we want 50% of women on board. It step by step. And it was very, very, I mean, for me, a very human experience to see the interest of this man who were just even not thinking that it was an issue. They would say, why we don't try to, and we improve. Same in Singapore. Singapore was an extremely interesting experience because in Singapore, we did an Asia forum and we gathered, again, some CEOs in link with Singapore Summit. And Singapore Summit, as you can imagine, it's a male-dominated world. And at the eve of the Formula One, then you see the gathering. Again, we don't make name and shame. We are not there to say we want a position, we want this. We just highlight. Thanks also to the works of McKinsey, you just quoted some of the results of the studies. They are our big partners in this year champion. And on dedicated works, that was the future of work, how can women bring a differentiation in the company and an added value? And in that case, it worked. I'm convinced that we don't have to punish people. We have to convince them that it's useful for them. Then, and it works. It really works. And we're very proud of what we're doing on that. And it's like a guideline, you know, but each country is different. You cannot do the same.
So on that point, I mean, what's interesting is that organizations, you know, have taken different perspectives on this. If you look at the perspectives of international organizations and in their work. So organizations like the IFC have taken very much a pro-quota approach. You know, thou shalt adopt quotas everywhere. And I'm perfectly, to be perfectly honest, I'm more with you on the idea that quotas don't work.
It depends. It's great. Quota works. But it depends where and
exactly.
When.
Exactly. So am I correct in if I hear you correct, that you're basically not a proponent in the work of the Women's Forum, not specifically advancing quotas worldwide, but basically saying, okay, we could have in some countries where corporate culture permits it, these quotas may work, but in other countries we need to adopt these various other, look at awareness raising, which is something you raised, and perhaps other levers that we need to unlock. Is that what you're...
Exactly. And you see, for instance, there's a very, very good, I'm convinced that if you really want to make advanced things, states have to lead by example. We need a juridical environment. Companies cannot do everything alone. And I'm convinced that the two really big, moment in a year where we can really influence is the G7 and G20. We have been extremely active for the G7 to promote many different measures, concrete measures and actions and initiatives during the G7 in Canada, the G7 in France, with very good results. Now we're working on the G7 on the United States. But I really think that the G20, taking about governance, it's a very, very good model. And I have the chance of being nominated by President Emmanuel Macron in the task force they called Empower Alliance, where we'll find a businesswoman at the head representing each country, 20 countries represented. And we are really preparing best practices, what can work or not, what is feasible or not. And I think that the Saudi presidency is really willing to make an example in November of what can be done in leadership, in the governance leadership and in business. I mean, they're very dedicated on that.
It's true, and actually both of us, I think we originally when we first met, that was in Canada at the International Women's Forum, and then subsequently I think we saw each other last in Riyadh when the G20 meetings were actually physical, and now of course we're doing this virtually. But this is a very important area that you're highlighting, and the Saudi presidency is in a way unique because it's the first time an Arab country is leading this way. Saudi Arabia, of course, I work there also, as you know, quite intensively, has a lot of their own challenges in terms of women on boards. This is something that they're starting, and we're seeing change. It is from a generally low point, because historically there have not been so many women, but now we have, for example, even the head of the stock exchange, Tadawul, is led by women, and there have been a number of prominent appointments.
And the president of the Alliance in Power, who is the Samba Group.
Also, yes, Rania.
She's a wonderful woman.
I think one of my magazines up on the shelf has a photo on it. But actually, on the Saudi presidency, I'd like to ask you sort of how this different or unique approach, because it is a different corporate culture, it's a different history, and a unique sort of country with a unique background, because they're, as I said, they're representing the whole Arab world in the G20. How do you see that manifesting in the work that you're doing within the G20 Empower Alliance, and also the W20 working group?
As you know, I think there is really a willingness to change things and to accelerate and to give better visibility and better leadership to women in the Arabic world, not only Saudi Arabia. I will give an example. I worked, as you know, a lot with the Emirati government and many women ministers, by the way, to prepare what we could not hold. It was our Middle East Women's Forum, with a lot of Saudi participation, by the way, that was to be held on the 7th and 8th of March for the International Day of Women in the Sorbonne and Louvre. We couldn't take it for the COVID reason, but I really appreciated to work for 1 year long with the government. And I learned a lot. I learned, as I'm at the head of the Women's Forum, I learned a lot of ideas and vision that they have that we don't have. I give you just a small example. As you know, one of the reasons why women quit their career, it's because they have a social pressure when we have children and we have to raise their families. And this is worldwide, but of course, you were talking about Japan, you have a very good legislation, but you have the social pressure that makes that you don't. It was not correct if you don't take care of the children and then of the elders. Then it's not a choice of women, but they cannot. Then what we need, it's a favorable environment to permit women to work. When I arrived in France 36 years ago from Italy, I was astonished. We had kindergarten, schools, canteen, everything was easy for women to work. And this is something that we don't think about. And you know what the Emirates had as idea? The paternity leave, that means the leave of only fathers, should start 2 days before going to the clinic. And it's just brilliant, because that means that they will take care of the household. They will take care of all the burden that we can have when we go to the clinic. And it's absolutely, there is no other country who has this idea. And of course, that prepares man to take care of. Then when his wife, comes back for the clinic, they know how to do, they're ready to. And it's absolutely revolutionary. Then it's one of the proposals that they did to the French government, when they asked me to prepare a mission for what can be done. And of course, we also suggested to the G7, because it seems as small things. It's not as many things. It's a change of mindset. It's True. Who has to take care of. And that comes from the Emirates. Then we have to be open-minded. Maybe there will be revolutionary, clever ideas that come from Saudi that we even don't think about. Then, I mean, this is extremely interesting to work all together in this way.
Absolutely, and there are different moving parts, and it's interesting you raised the example of Emirates, because in some way it's an example where the government has led very far in terms of appointing youth minister, appointing women ministers, having achieved significant, the responsible for the Expo 2020. So they've achieved on the government side enormous progress, but in the corporate sphere, I mean, if we talk about quotas, it's the only country in the Arab world that actually tried or experimented with quotas, and I guess, in my humble opinion, it was challenging, and they have not really enforced it so much. And it goes to your earlier point about where quotas are suitable to what corporate culture, and this is another point we've just been discussing in these governance dialogues with CEOs and board members from the region. But if we look, I'd like to sort of shift gears for a second and talk about the current scenario, COVID, Black Lives Matter. I mean, there are so many pressing debates in terms of corporate sustainability, in terms of diversity. Now I think that the future debate on diversity perhaps will be even more so on or at least to the same extent, on racial diversity, which is so far, let's face it, not really received the same attention. What is your take on how these various trends will sing and dance together going forward, if I may say so?
You know, you cannot take care of women without take care of diversity and, of course, inclusion. Then all this is come together. What we do at the Women's Forum is really bridging humanity, all sectors different. But I would like to, because you talk about the COVID, I would like to highlight once more something that is really very dear to my heart, and it's one of the priorities of the Women's Forum. We are preparing, we are in a disrupted world. Everything is going very quickly. We don't know what the life of tomorrow will be done. 60, 80, we don't know. Jobs will be completely transformed in the 5, 6, 10 years. You don't know what the jobs of tomorrow will be, yours or mine. We don't know. But what we know, that we cannot imagine that Black people, women, minorities, indigenous are not associated. We have to be, half of the planet has to be associated to transform this world. We cannot imagine one single moment that we are not fully part of, because otherwise not only we will develop and scale up injustices, but also we lose all this capacity to create growth, to create prosperity, and to be in dignity. And that's why I think that it's a very big opportunity talking about boards. What's something that we propose to the French government, because there are quotas in French government, that we can maybe extend it in other countries. And of course, it's one of my intention. It's that it's good to have 44% women in boards in France, 38% in Germany, and so on. But if you look what it's the governance at the level of the executive committees, we are still very bad. In France, for instance, we are world champion for the governance at the boards, but we're only 18%. Small improvement each year, small 1%, 2% each year. Then probably with the government, we are thinking to put quotas also on the executive board. But what I wanted to highlight, it's not the number, it's, if allowed me, the quality. Because if in the boards and in the strategic executive committees, you have only, of course it's a joke, I'm making it, like a joke, only people coming from the communication of human resources, we won't have the same decision power, decision leadership that if we came from engineer school or from strategy or for finance. Because at the end of the day, the work is done by technicity. It's done by people who knows. It's done by skills that are no more the same that it was at my age. I have a PhD in law, wonderful, but now I would love to be engineer, because if I want to be active to fight against the climate change, I need to have an expertise in energy. And this is something that we have to explain to the new generation. We need, because, you know, girls, we have very nice statistics. Girls worldwide, 70% of girls want to have a positive impact, want to work for purpose. Their career is not seen in terms of power or in terms of money. It's seen in terms of positive impact. And that was the same at my period. At my period, what they wanted to do, they wanted to be school mistresses or nurses. But now the world has changed. You don't want to be school nurses. You want to be the one who invents the mark that people want. You want to be the one who invents the vaccines. You want to be the one who replaces the nurse by a robot. Because if it's the man who does it, we will be excluded. Then this is the aim. Women from school to the boardrooms. At least 30% boards, we ask, coming from STEM, in the boards and in the COMEX. By 2025, that's tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
It's a very strong ask, but we have the talents, and it's also a way to attract the new talents. Because if we say you have to work in a scientific education, and you have to work in a scientific career, but you will be sure that at the end of the day you will have a decision role in the company, That will make also more attractive the STEM careers.
I think that, you know, I would just like to ask perhaps one last question, because we're unfortunately limited in time, but all of your observations are really interesting, in particular on STEM and future, because you're right that there is this kind of old-fashioned or old stereotypes that have unfortunately settled in, and they're prevalent worldwide. And we're seeing some shifts even in you know, Saudi Arabia, but or other regions where women have traditionally had more conservative roles. And, you know, in some of your work on STEM, and I know that I think you published a recent report in it, you highlight that basically, you know, some basic statistics, you know, 85% of the jobs of 2030 don't yet exist, and about 70% of STEM accounts for about 70% of sort of rapidly growing skills that that the workforce in general will need. And I think my last question with you, I would like to sort of get your recommendations and the recommendations of the Women Forum on how women can be empowered in this particular field, and what impact do you think that would have on corporate boardrooms ultimately?
I think that we have first to raise the attention to women of the importance to women and girls from 5 years old and long life, and that's skill, reskill, upskill, all of that. It's not finished. It's not because we're 50 years old that we cannot be part of the jobs of the future. This is the first thing. Be confident we can. Secondly, explain to the parents and to the teachers how important it is to explain to girls that they can do it. Because, you know, you were just saying, some countries, Saudi Arabia, you have 80% of women engineers. Iran, 60% of women engineers. Emirates, 65%. Malaysia, 50%. And in the old democracies, where we are more gender oriented, we have less than 24%, because it's a mentality. And we have just explained, and if we can explain that the society needs the woman, not because they're women, but because we bring an added value for the whole humanity in each field, that would be extremely important. Then different levels, business, of course. Business have to lead by example. And we have a wonderful roundtable with the Women's Forum, acting each day in home to show that. Secondly, of course, the governments. And I think the G7 and G20 are really the right place to raise the tension and to take the right decisions. And third, on an individual basis, mothers, children, all of us, let's think what is important to the future of all of us. And I would just finish with a very positive tone. During this COVID, we saw that the young generation in each country have been solidar, have been generous, have been incredible. I never heard, and not only, of course, everybody says that 80% of women have been more active than men. Okay, nurse and people that was taking care, great. But the young generation, girls and men, and boys, sorry, have been extremely generous, and nobody asked them. And you know what has been something that really gave me a lot of optimism? I didn't hear one single young people saying, oh, let them die, they cost us too much, we will pay for them. And in fact, in any way, the old people were, I mean, it was normal that should die. No one in no countries, they all said, replace the right, how can I say, the right things at the right place. Don't pay too much people that are not needed by the society. Let's think about. And I really think that that opens the mind for the new generation to say, at the end of the day, what is important is a human being. Let's put again the human being at the center of the society. And I like very much, I will finish with that, the initiative that has been taken in Italy by the Minister of Gender Equality, Elena Bonetti, who created a task force, 10 women for the Renaissance of Italy. And we know that the Renaissance was the period that everything was beautiful, everything was innovating, everything was what we dream of, because human being was at the center of everything. Then let's think about that, and we will really construct a better and inclusive world.
Thank you, Chiara. Thank you for that positive message. I think it's a beautiful message. I agree with you, having spent some time, well, at least the lockdown period in Italy, that there was a certain solidarity, and it was beautiful, and hoping for Renaissance 2.0 perhaps including the STEM and all the other bits of the conversation we've had today. And thank you for sharing your views on how this conversation around women empowerment, but particularly women on boards, has evolved differently in different parts of the world. And we'll be continuing this dialogue and looking into this in further episodes of Governance Dialogues. For those of you who are interested to tuning in further and perhaps discovering more research, I encourage you to visit the site of the Women's Forum, which provides all these various reports gratis. And we've also commented quite extensively on different specific governance angles, including a recent Forbes article called Directing Diversity from Top Down, which talks about the importance of regulators being diverse before we can talk about companies being diverse. So lots of different moving parts. Thank you all for tuning in for this episode of Governance Dialogues, and we hope to have you join on future occasions. Thank you very much.